Wonderful. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us here today. So my name is David Olson. I am the Director of Education at Retro Report, which is actually based in New York City, though that is not where I am joining you from today, but I'll talk a little bit about that. Retro Report, the goal today is to give you the rundown of what Retro Report is, talk about some of the different places, particularly in history, in civics and government, and in a handful of other social studies connected disciplines where Retro Report has resources. Everything I'm going to talk to you about today, all the videos I'm going to show you, all the lesson plans that exist, all of those things are entirely free. So I'm not here to sell you anything. It's merely to provide you with what I hope are high quality resources that you can turn around and use in your classroom without really any hesitation. And hopefully Retro Report becomes a place that you come back to look for additional resources over time. So like I said, I'm David Olson, Director of Education. Also lurking somewhere in our meeting here is Isadora Verajau, who's our engagement producer. So she's one of the people who is really in charge of some of our outreach, putting together our newsletter, our social media activity, trying to figure out how do we best reach our audience, which at Retro Report really has become more and more and more trying to reach educators. Retro Report is an organization that's been around for about 9 years now. It's essentially a journalism organization. We create short form documentaries that really connect history and civics to figure out what is this news story and what's the historical background we need to know about it. And what we heard over the last couple of years was that teachers would say, oh yeah, I've used Retro Report in my classroom. I teach social studies, I teach US history, I teach civics or government, I teach environmental science, things like that. And I've used your videos. And so what Retro Report decided to do was sort of dive into that and say, yeah, let's make it a goal to connect with teachers and try to meet the needs of teachers. So my position was created. I'm joining you today actually from Madison, Wisconsin, where I live, and where prior to joining Retro Report for the previous more than a decade, I taught at a public high school in Madison. So, you know, in Wisconsin, I would describe it as a large urban high school and district. And I realize I'm talking to folks in New York City. So it doesn't get any larger. It doesn't get any more urban than folks in New York City. But in Madison, Wisconsin, with our 4 public high schools, I taught at one of them. And my background was really teaching AP US government and politics, criminal justice, modern US history, and then I'm guessing like some of you in the room, you know, you may have been in a leadership position. I was a department chair for a number of years. So I often taught sort of whatever was left hanging out there. So I've taught a whole bunch of different things, mostly at the high school level. And I started my career as a middle school teacher. In addition to my teaching, prior to working with Retro Report, I also have some connections to a bunch of other history and civic ed organizations. I've done a lot of work with the National Constitution Center and iCivics. I've done a lot of work and written a lot of lessons for PBS, including for a ton of Ken Burns films. I'm on the executive board for the Wisconsin Council for the Social Studies. So really working with and supporting teachers has been a passion of mine for a long time. And now that's what I get to do full time. So Retro Report, as I said, we're actually New York based. Although I am not New York based, it means I get to make at least a handful of trips to wonderful New York City each year. So Retro Report, if you haven't stumbled across it, you can go scout it out now. We're actually in the same building as the governor's New York City office. And so we're in sort of the Midtown, in between Midtown and Murray Hill area here. So if you're walking down 3rd Avenue, you look for the one with the yellow and red and blue sort of awning outside. So we are a New York institution. And so Retro Report itself, like I said, we're an organization that makes short form documentary films. And the goal here is really to try to figure out how to connect past and present. So most Retro Report films sort of go one of two directions. It's either there was this important news story in the past. Did we forget about it? Did we get the reporting right? Did we learn the lessons we ought to have learned? So let's follow up. Or there's this thing happening in the news right now. What's the backstory and the historical context we need to understand to make sense of this story and to be, engaged and informed citizens? In total, Retro Report has about over 250 films in our library. All of them are entirely free and available on our website. We've taken a chunk of those that we know can be used well in the classroom and also put them on the education side of our website, which I'll show you in a little bit here, and developed some support materials that go with them. So some comprehension questions, some discussion questions, and then we also have a growing collection now that I've been hired and am reaching out to additional educators of actual lesson plans and activities. And I can show you a few of those today as well. And really, our plans on the education side are to continue to grow and grow. So that means creating more lessons, doing more trainings and webinars, heading to conferences, and then building a network of teachers who can help create stuff for us that will turn around and pay folks to do, as well as developing a group to sort of give us advice and say, here are areas in the curriculum where we need help. If you can make a film about X, that would be of great assistance to me as I try to teach this thing in US history or world history or civics, that sort of thing. So our goal really is to serve teachers as best we can. And here, that part of the reason why I was excited to join Retro Report, even though it was a really hard decision to decide to leave the classroom, is that Retro Report, not only is it free, but they're really good at what they do. And all of you know that video is one of the most powerful tools you can use in your classroom. It's engaging for students. It allows them to examine different perspectives. They get to hear from the actual individuals who have lived their own stories and have things to say about it. And Retro Report does a great job of that, of finding really interesting and engaging stories to help us learn the complexity of things and to examine things from different perspectives. Another great thing about Retro Report and how you can use it in your classroom is pretty much all of our films are in the 5 to 12 minute range. So Retro Report is not your source for, I'm going to pop in a documentary. We don't pop anything in anymore, do we? I know I'm probably a little too young to, I think I've avoided any use of a VCR in my teaching time, but certainly I've popped in more than my fair share of DVDs. You want to chime in, Brian?
Yes, you don't know the headache of having to rewind and make sure your VCR tape is queued up to the right spot.
True.
And then if while recording commercials, if you're recording something on TV. Well, that's because I've been around a long time. So.
There you go. Yeah, trying to pop in and record hey, I need this 60-minute segment that I want to use Monday morning. And did I get it? Did I bleed over into Andy Rooney? I understand. So the Retro Report films, they are not designed for, I'm going to put this in and this is the next 3 days of my class. That's not what we do. Retro Report films are great to prime engagement, to introduce topics, or to introduce different perspectives on a topic, but they're meant to be integrated into a class, to be part of what you do during a class period, not to be, yep, today was a movie day. That's really not what Retro Report is designed to be. On top of that, we actually employ an in-house fact checker. Every single one of our films, before it goes out either on our website or a broadcast partner or things like that, are rigorously fact checked. So we want to make sure that the information we're putting out there is accurate, that it's providing the right context for folks, all of those sorts of things, so that we're putting good information out into the world. And really, it does a great job of connecting history and civics and current events. I know in my time in the classroom, I always like to start my class the same way each day by asking students, what's going on in the world? What do we need to know, right? Because my goal was to get students, whether it was a history class, a government class, my criminal justice class, to understand that the stuff we were going to talk about impacted them and their world. So what better way to ask them what's happening in the world and then figure out how we can make connections to the content that we're learning. And I think Retro Report does a really good job of bringing those two things together and starting to answer that question of, why does this matter? Why should I care about this, right? That's the thing. As history, civics, social studies teachers, that's the question, that if our students leave without understanding that connection, we probably haven't done a very good job, right? The goal of social studies is to say, here's why it matters, and here's why it matters to you. So that's something I hope Retro Report assists teachers in being able to answer. So I'm going to show you a couple clips of some different films about different things in our video library here as some examples. So one of my favorite ways that Retro Report goes here is trying to figure out, how did we get to this moment, right? So I'm going to show you a short segment about some of the history of recycling. It has a New York City connection, and it has kind of an odd connection, but how is it that we got to the point where, I mean, yesterday was recycling day in my neighborhood. I wheeled it out to the end of the driveway, and the city came and picked it up and brought it somewhere. But how did that begin, right? And Retro Report, I think, integrates really well with the inquiry design model. I don't know if that's part of something you have folks in New York City focus on, but figuring out and having your students craft a compelling question, and then figuring out what sort of supporting questions can help us answer that and understand the complexity of a situation. So we're going to watch a short segment here from The Roots of Recycling.
Like a magnet for refuse, the barge by now had collected over 6 million pounds of trash from all over Long Island and New York City.
Everybody's garbage. Everybody had a problem getting rid of their garbage. And we were the best game, I guess, at the time.
At that point in time, everything looked so good. It was the start of something that I had great hopes for.
Harrelson predicted profits for disposing of the Mobros load in the first place, and eventually for generating electricity from the methane gas created as the garbage decomposed.
It was an idea that I had read about. A lot of experts said it's a coming thing. So I just arbitrarily on my own decided to give it a whirl.
But on April Fool's Day, shortly after the barge docked in North Carolina, a local TV news reporter was at the scene and sparked an outcry.
The first call we got was, "You're shipping New York City's rats down to us." And I said, "No, first there was no rats on it."
No one said a barge load of waste. It was a barge load of New York waste.
As Giswali remembers it, the pivotal moment came when a state environmental official spotted a bedpan on the barge.
And they claimed, because of the bedpan, that the barge had hospital waste. So we were told to get it out of there.
The barge then headed for a landfill in Louisiana. But when it got there, state officials again barred it from unloading.
There could be infectious waste from hospitals. There could be hazardous waste.
A homeless garbage barge.
That's when the story exploded.
Dripping brown ooze of possibly infectious material.
The governor of Louisiana threatened to send out the National Guard if the barge tied up there.
The vagabond barge has become an international issue.
The most watched load of garbage in the memory of man.
6 ports have already refused the refuse.
The barge has been chased away by the warplanes of 2 nations, and now it's anchored here, 5 miles off the coast of Key West, Florida. Still loaded with tons of garbage, still unwanted.
So there you go. So that one is just a snippet of that film. The rest of it talks about how this sort of seminal event led to the creation of recycling programs in many places across the country. Another aspect of Retro Report films, wonderful. Brian says he has memories of that. And one of the things I think you'll notice, both in that video and the one we're going to watch here, really great characters and compelling humans that help to tell the story. And here, so, putting those stories at the center as a way to engage students, as a way for students to learn and empathize with different types of people and hear from multiple perspectives. Retro Report does a great job of putting those human stories and that impact at the center. So here, this clip that I'll show you is from a film we created for a series connected with Gilder Lehrman. They did a history school class focusing on the Cold War. And so Retro Report, we created a series of, I think, 7 or 8 different films that connected with different portions of that class. And what Gilder Lehrman told us was, of the history school courses that they ran both last spring and during the summer, the Retro Report Cold War class was one of the highest rated that they had. So this one takes a look at the Berlin airlift, but again, puts a story at the center.
Gail Halverson was one of the American pilots who volunteered to airlift food into Berlin.
At the time, I was having difficulty in a relationship with a girlfriend of long-term standing, and I decided I just well be over there as over here.
One day, after landing in Berlin, Halverson started talking to a group of German kids standing at the fence line.
I went over a little ways to meet the kids. I was impressed with them, 10 plus or minus 2 years old, and they just to say, hey, we don't want to go to the Soviets. We'll do anything. Just don't give up on us. Kids that age, knowing the importance of free agency, the ability to govern yourself. They said, just don't worry about us. Someday we'll have enough to eat. But if we lose our freedom, we'll never get it back. And I marveled at that.
Halverson wanted to give them something, but he only had 2 sticks of gum. So he broke them in half and told the children to keep an eye out for his plane the next go-around.
Well, I knew what it was like to be cut off and to be out on the end of the string. And so it was just a no-brainer to drop chocolate bars to the kids in West Berlin that didn't have any.
I was elated. I saw Gail Halverson's airplane wiggling the wings, and we all waved. We called him the Schokoladenbombe, the chocolate bomb. And then we saw these parachutes coming out of his airplane. Of course, there were more children than parachutes, and the boys were always faster. But that was not important. The important thing was, this was something hopeful happening to us. This was like, in those ruins, all of a sudden flowers came to bloom.
The newspaper guy was there covering the kids and the airlift, and all of a sudden he looked up above and parachutes and candy bars were coming down. And he had that on the news right away, and the colonel called me and said, Halverson, what are you doing over Berlin? Well, and I knew he knew. I said, I'm dropping candy to the kids. He says, well, keep it up and keep me informed. Candy companies were super. They sent over all I could drop, and we had all our pilots tying up tanks of parachutes. We even dropped some in East Berlin. The Soviets complained about that, so we just kept doing it in West Berlin.
I think my favorite part of that story is how he starts by saying, well, I was having trouble with my girlfriend, so I decided to go off and fight in World War II. I might as well have been there as here. So again, you can see how by putting story at the center, by focusing on what are some of the narratives that then can help us connect to some of the history, and then how can we go beyond that to understand the impact of policies and events. We also, at Retro Report, we're hoping to focus on skills as well. Oh, what just happened here? There we go. And really our area of connecting to skills. You guys still seeing my presentation? Okay, it wigged out on me a little bit. Our goal.
We see your browser too, if that matters or not.
Yeah. We should be okay. The rest of these tabs are other ones I hope to show you. So, so here, we think that building skills in terms of information literacy, media literacy, and helping students become better historians and researchers is important. Probably like the rest of you, when I was a teacher, this was something I focused on in a couple different courses, and there are some wonderful resources out there. I know as an educator, I use some resources from Stanford History Education Group. I use some from the museum before it shut down and changed names. They have some wonderful resources. So our connection here and what we hope to focus on is something that we do in-house, which is fact checking. So our goal was to be able to try to model the fact checking process. And actually, Joe Hogan, who for a long time was our in-house fact checker and now is a film producer himself, he's available for speaking engagements. In fact, last week, we did a webinar with the Virginia History Day folks to meet with teachers looking at National History Day projects to talk about how you could integrate some of these skills. And so here we'll take a look at a portion of this video of how to fact check history.
You hear a lot these days about fact checking.
Fact checking.
Fact checking. You got to do it.
Fact checking.
Is that true?
Jake, it is indeed false.
But what exactly is fact checking? How does it work? How do you fact check something that happened decades or even centuries ago? And why does it matter? To describe it simply, fact-checking is making sure that a claim is true. You take whatever sentence you're checking or whatever claim you're checking, and you try to determine the best way to verify each fact. What you really have to do as a fact-checker is approach each claim as a prosecutor would. You're putting the claim on trial, and you want to get to a position where a judge and jury would say, yes, that claim is true. So let's say I have to fact-check the following sentence. Donald Trump took the oath of office on Thursday, January 17th, 2017, wearing a fantastic blue tie. I would have to verify that Donald Trump did indeed take the oath of office, that he did it on January 17th, 2017, that January 17th, 2017 was a Thursday, that he was wearing a blue tie when he took the oath of office. The one claim that I wouldn't have to check is that the blue tie was fantastic, because that's a statement of opinion. And just for the record, Trump took the oath of office on January 20th. That was a Friday, and he was wearing a red tie. That's a more recent example, but here's how you go about fact-checking something historical. You want to get as close to the event as possible. So you don't necessarily want to use articles written recently about the event, because those haven't necessarily been fact-checked and they're far away from the event. Try to find newspaper accounts from the time. Talk to people who were there and try to verify what they say and what they remember as best you can with archival material, newspaper reports, things like that, images, video or footage, film from the event. The best.
All right, and we actually have a lesson plan and activity that goes along with this film that we saw a little chunk of. So this on our website is the lesson plan page. So you can show the film from here. And then if you scroll down, one of the things as someone who recently left the classroom, I wanted to make sure that all of the classroom materials that we produced for educators were as easy to use as possible. So they're all available as Google Docs. So you can make a copy of the activity. You can make whatever changes you feel are appropriate, things you want to add or take out from the lesson, and really they're ready to go and turn around and post in Google Classroom or some other learning management system. So here, as an example, this is the student activity for Intro to Fact Checking. So here provides a little bit of background and an objective. It has you watch the film, analyze a few things, answer some comprehension questions about the film, and then figure out how to apply some of these lessons. There's a couple other Retro Report films mentioned in this one. And so they go into what's the difference between bad facts, like what do we straight up get wrong sometimes, and how do we find those things? And then bad narratives. How is the way that the media sometimes reports on stories, how does it lead us to faulty conclusions? So having students try to distinguish between bad facts and bad narratives, and then to go through and do their own practice at identifying claims. How do I break down some different sentences to determine what sort of things could I actually fact check and which ones can't I? And then where might I go to put this into practice and actually practice the fact checking? Okay, so that's a lesson that is available for folks on our website here.
You hear a lot these days.
There we go. And then a brand new set of resources that we created centers around issues of redistricting and gerrymandering. And in particular, if you're teaching a civics or government course, I implore you, it's time. Now is the best time, since this is a once every decade exercise. It's certainly something that as a government teacher, I would talk about redistricting and gerrymandering every year. But right now is the time where we have wonderful real-time data happening across every state where people are engaging in this exercise. So now is a great time to have students delve in to try to understand this process and how it works. So we have an updated film that just relaunched a couple weeks ago, focusing on some of the history of redistricting and gerrymandering, and trying to figure out some of the tensions with gerrymandering versus what are referred to as majority minority districts. I know in New York City, not only do you have a whole slew of congressional districts, but there are a couple that have been created as majority minority districts. So having your students understand what that means, and then what some of the consequences, maybe positive, maybe negative, come from the creation of majority minority districts. And here there's two different lesson plans, each with student activities. The way I chose to sort of break this up is to focus on sort of the two different parts of the process. There's the reapportionment and redistricting portion that every single state has to go through. And then as one type of redistricting, looking at what is gerrymandering, how does it happen, and what are some of the consequences of gerrymandering? I know this is something that across the state of New York, I mean, this is a hot topic right now. I think it was just a couple weeks ago that those new proposed maps got sent to the governor, or they're being debated in the state legislature. Anyone know where's the status? I remember seeing some of the updated maps. Do we know? Okay, let's watch a quick segment of this film as an intro here.
It's one of the darkest arts of electoral politics, and it's perfectly legal.
This is like original sin. Both sides are infected with it.
Gerrymandering. It has a surprising history and a contentious future as Republicans and Democrats battle over data from the 2020 census to redraw political maps to their candidates' advantage.
The census data is the beginning of redistricting, which is the beginning of the gerrymandering season.
What it has become to mean is districts that I don't like because somebody else drew them.
The former steel town of Tarentum in western Pennsylvania is a mix of working-class Republicans and Democrats. Former Congressman Jason Altmaier says that gave him a close-up view of how gerrymandering works.
When I was in office, if you lived in this house, you were my constituent. But if you lived on this side, your congressman was 60 miles away in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. It's a small town. They're in the same school district. They're one community, except for the fact they were represented by two different members of Congress.
In the decade after each new census, states redraw their congressional and legislative districts. The party in power, whether Republican or Democrat, typically draws maps to protect it.
All right. So let me give you a quick preview here. Actually, the next thing I wanted to show you is we have a webinar actually a week from today. Retro Report, along with some partners at GeoCivics, which is an organization out of the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and New American History, which is an organization out of the University of Richmond. We've come together to share and highlight a number of new free resources for teaching about redistricting and gerrymandering. So if this is something you imagine yourself teaching, and here we have definite connections to history, civics and government, but also geography, economics. So regardless of what course you teach, there might be a way to make a clear connection to something that is timely in the news right now. And I'll drop the bit.ly to register for that one as well, although it's just Teach Jerry here. And that one is a week from today at 7 Eastern. And I can show you, this is the landing page for this collection. So it starts with the video that we just saw a little snippet of here. There's the lesson and activity focusing on reapportionment and redistricting. So here it starts by figuring out, okay, where is the basis for this? So we look to the Constitution, where it talks about the need for a census and when that's going to be done. There's this really cool apportionment map. So you can see historically how this has changed, the members of Congress throughout the country, where they've been apportioned over time, dating back to 1910. And all of this information is coming directly from the US Census Bureau. So here you can look at the entire map. You can go and look decade by decade. You can also hone in. So if you click on an individual state, it's going to show you over time how those seats have changed in Congress, right? And I imagine this is something that since New York, unfortunately, you've been dwindling over the past several decades. So you can see sort of decade by decade what's happened here. If I remember correctly, in the 2020 census, New York was the last state to lose a seat. And actually, my home state of Minnesota, we narrowly avoided losing a seat. It was New York that lost it. And it was something ridiculous. Like, if New York would have counted like 256 more people, you would have retained that seat in Congress. The other thing to pose to your students here is this map down here, which shows how many people each representative actually represents. So back in 1910, a representative from New York represented 211, little under 212,000 people overall. Well, in the 2020 census, so beginning with the next election, each representative will represent over 777,000 individuals. So this can be a great place to begin talking about, what are the consequences of that? What does that mean for representation, and how individuals might interact with their member of Congress? Later in this lesson, it has students look at some of the requirements for redistricting and how they might vary state by state. And then my favorite part is it asks your students to go draw some new maps. So there's actually 3 different options here, 3 different digital tools that I explain. I think each of them has some positives and negatives. A great place to start, I think, would be Dave's Redistricting, which unfortunately is not my own, but just a wonderful free resource here. And this one actually starts with the current maps. So you can go take a look at the state of New York. Although, to be honest, if you're working with middle school students, maybe 9th or 10th graders, you might want to start with a easier state, right? A state that has fewer congressional districts. Maybe pick a neighboring state. Connecticut would be a great one to sort of delve into and see how these tools work. But if we look at New York, we could take a look at the congressional map. We're going to take a look here, should show us. So one of the things I would go through and play with this a little bit before you take a look with students, but you'll be able to see here, still loading. It's going to show me all of the districts. I'm going to have to zoom in real close here to New York City because there's so many districts, as all of you are well aware, right? And then you can take a look district by district and see what are you going to have to adjust? How are the populations going to have to change in order to fit and be equal population wise? And then the gerrymandering activity can take you in a number of directions as well. This, I'll show you real quick, is one of my absolute favorite digital resources and interactive maps. This is actually from the folks at New American History. This is the Electing the House of Representatives interactive. And this one, it shows you an interactive map here. And this is great in particular for a US history class. It has congressional data dating, all the way back to the, early Congresses here. So you can take a look at how did different moments in time impact the makeup of Congress, right? So if we want to look at the impact after 1860 and what happens, my daughter just got home, which is why my dog is barking again. So, so here, this is a fantastic tool. One of the things I like having students do is you can actually click on an individual congressional district, and it'll show you over time who represented that district. All right. Any questions about this? I'm going to make sure my daughter got in okay. Give me just one moment here. All right. So continuing on here, possibly of interest to other folks in New York. Hold on, I think I gotta let my my daughter go get in the house. So excuse me one moment. All right, folks, my apologies. Catastrophe averted. The fifth grader is safely in the house. All right. We also put together at the end of August some resources for teaching about September 11th. And I know that not only is this area, something that is definitely focused on in New York City, there are also probably innumerable resources within New York City. But I also know, having heard from some NYC educators, it can be a hard topic to focus on because it is very personal and real and close to home. But our collection here has 4 different films. 2 that were just released at the end of August. One focusing on some New York City police officers who had gone into the North Tower, were in the North Tower as it collapsed, but managed to make it out. This one, the activity is primarily a primary source analysis, looking at some resources from Internet Archive and some different television clips of September 11th, the 9/11 Museum and Memorial. There's also a film that looks at the 20-year arc of the war in Afghanistan. This one, what I created to go with it was a structured academic controversy. So looking at should the United States have pulled out of Afghanistan? after 20 years, and analyzing a number of different perspectives, and having students go through a process of trying to reach consensus or figure out what do they agree on or disagree on. We also have a film that focuses on a handful of people in the Detroit area who were charged after 9/11 for terrorism activities, although it turns out those charges were entirely false. So this one looks at the story of these men and uses it as a way to examine the perspectives of Muslims and Arab Americans in this time period after 9/11. They're also, the last film in this collection looks at a CIA contractor who was the only contractor who was ever charged with things related to torture for his actions in Afghanistan. And here, this is an activity that looks at classifying different arguments, and it also, there's an interactive timeline that looks at what was the public discourse and what was happening in our society in this time period after 9/11 when it came to issues of torture and enhanced interrogation techniques. And so here, I'll show you real quick that landing page. So this is our teaching about 9/11 resources. So here goes through each of the films. So here's the 9/11 Heroes one with the lesson plan and activity, the Afghanistan War, the sleeper cell, and then the CIA contractor, the torture related case. Also down at the bottom, we held a webinar. It was me, Victoria Pasquantonio, who is the education producer at PBS NewsHour Extra, although they just renamed themselves to PBS NewsHour Classroom, and then a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison who put together a whole bunch of primary source materials to take a look at September 11th and look at it more from a historical lens as opposed to a remembrance lens. So you can go ahead and watch that webinar here as well if you're interested. All right. So just a few more things, and then I'd love to hear from folks and see what questions you have. In terms of other collections, if you're teaching civics or government, we have a number of films that look at different political conventions, some momentous ones in history, along with some important elections, turning point elections. Looks at some very famous historic political ads, the Daisy Girl ad, the Reagan's Morning in America, the Willie Horton ad. We have a series looking at some different aspects of civil rights, including focusing on things like busing and housing, along with voting. Our Cold War series that we did with Gilder Lerman, a look at public policy, a number of different things. And then, like I said, we also have quite a few films that focus on environmental science, and sort of that link between what policies we create that relate to the environment. So these are great whether you're teaching an environmental science course and want to make this directly applicable and relatable for students, or if you're teaching a government course and want to say, let's take a look at public policies that relate to the environment. They're great to go in either direction. And then some things coming up from Retro Report. We have some more fact-checking lessons and activities. We also are waiting to hear on a Library of Congress grant, where we're going to put together a program focusing on the Cold War from a Latin American lens. We have a couple existing films in our library and a couple others, including one that's going to be part of Frontline on PBS next Tuesday, looking at a massacre in El Salvador at El Mozote. We've put together and are putting together a collection. I know many of you have probably taught, whether you teach world history or US history, you've looked at the Cold War. And when it comes to Latin America, my guess is folks talk about Bay of Pigs invasion, Cuban Missile Crisis, and that might be where it ends. So this really is a good way to try to diversify how you're looking at the Cold War and what other points of view are we missing and leaving out of our curriculum. So our goal is to try to help connect folks to good resources for that. We'll be at plenty of conferences, state level social studies conferences, NCSS, NCHE. We also do classroom visits. Like I said, our in-house fact checker, Joe Hogan, who you saw, he's willing to do classroom visits in New York City, perhaps in person, otherwise for sure virtually. We also have the people who create our films. So if there's a film you see that you're like, we would love to have a class hear from the person who created the film, that's something that we can try to arrange as well. And then, like I said at the top of our webinar here, we're looking to connect with more teachers and hear from teachers about what you need in the classroom. So I could talk a little bit about that. This will actually be live and available within the next couple weeks here. But our goal is to assemble a diverse group of teachers, be it geography, background, what they teach, to help us do a better job and reach teachers' needs, and help us build out our resource library. The things that we're going to ask of teachers are probably to attend some quarterly virtual meetings, to engage in some lesson writings, to find, here's a Retro Report film that I think works well in my classroom, and here's what I would create to sort of go along with it, and then to give us feedback and advice on what sort of things teachers need. And then, we have to hold up our end of the bargain as well. And so there'll be a yearly stipend connected with this, some freebies, some giveaways for you. And then this one, I'm not gonna lie, this is gonna be less enticing to my audience here than pretty much anywhere else in the country. But ideally, we're looking at hosting an in-person meeting of this advisory group. So obviously for you folks already in New York City, it's not nearly as enticing travel wise. But when I pitched this to,
well, yeah, but it would be also nice to be able to meet in person no matter where it is.
Yes. And I mean, the other thing that I've spoken with Brian about is that once we're able, and once New York City Department of Education gives the go-ahead for some in-person PD and training, we have a great space at our office in Midtown, and we're gonna invite some New York City teachers out to come, meet with some of our filmmakers, to work with some of our materials, to give us some feedback, and do that in person. And so we've got space, and we're gonna be happy to invite you. So that's what I got, folks. What sort of things can I answer for you?
We don't have any questions in the chat yet, but that was thank you, David, for a what did I just do in my chat? I just made it. There's just the plethora of resources and lessons, and just the videos and the interactive map. I know Phil I think is having a hard time connecting to his audio, but I know he would love the map, because one of his favorite things is the geography. But I wasn't expecting that. I knew about the videos. I wasn't expecting that much support stuff. So thank you for sharing, and there's so much to delve into. So
yeah,
I'll let people open it up for any questions or comments from anybody.
Excellent. Thank you, Donovan. And I did stick in the chat there the link to get connected to our newsletter. I promise I will only send you one email a week. Usually comes out Monday mornings that'll land in your inbox. And it's really probably, it's the best way to stay connected to when we have new films, when we've created new lessons, when we have trainings or other opportunities that come up. Again, my job, and the reason I was willing to leave the classroom and come work for Retro Report was they're committed to making really high quality materials free for teachers, and finding ways to connect and meet the needs of teachers. And I think we do that really well, particularly with US history, especially more modern US history, with civics and government. And our goal is to keep building that out and find new ways to help meet the needs of teachers. Yes, thank you, Richard.
Brian.
Yeah. Go ahead, Guy.
Thank you. I'd like to raise a compelling question in terms of having a global connection to Afghanistan. I'm very curious about what kind of resources you have for that. I think it's a rich and can be a rich inquiry. Potentials to Asia and other parts of the world in terms of also historical connections to conflicts and the ever-ending nature of conflicts. So I think it has true potential. When I heard you raise that question, should the United States have ended the war in Afghanistan? I was frankly amazed by it, and I'm curious to see what you have in the archives for it.
Yeah, please do. So we have the film that tries to take a pretty good overarching view of this 20-year arc of history. And what I put in the chat there was the link to that student activity of what we would be asking students to do to examine. And then Isadora just put in the link to like the full set of resources for teaching about 9/11, the sort of 4 different films. And yeah, I think one of the things that our filmmakers, I think if you look at the 250 plus resources in our library, it's definitely more US focused, but we do have some global points of view, and trying to examine the role of the United States in the world. And that's also something we're gonna keep pushing into. Part of the reason we're developing this series looking at the Cold War in Latin America is it ties in with some things we've already created, as well as some places where I think we ought to go, right? It's my opinion that the Cold War in Latin America gets short shrift in US history and world history courses across the country. So what are some ways we can give that better context and really what's standing in the way is teachers having good resources and potentially some training and assistance in implementing those resources. So that's the goal. Any other questions?
And as we expected, a lot of this is a jumping off point for everybody. So interesting. And I think one of the nice things about what you've shown us is it looks fairly intuitive for playing around with it and stuff. So laid out with straightforward design. So that should be good for teachers to jump into. So that's great.
Yeah. And actually within the next week and a half, we're going to have a new education landing page that I think will make it even easier and more user friendly. We sort of are at the beginning of our journey of connecting with teachers and being a go-to destination. So things are, we're only going to create more films, more classroom resources, and try to find ways to be more user-friendly and useful to teachers across the country. Yeah, Catherine, you make an excellent point about proxy conflicts, and you're right. Hopefully, within another couple of years, we'll be able to take a look at things in Africa or Asia as well, and really try to round out that series. I totally agree. So, our goal is to try to find compelling stories that help make connections for students, that help put historical events in context, or help students understand their world today by understanding the history behind it.
Hello.
Yes, Donovan.
Yes, I would say one of the things that would facilitate my interaction with the students I work with are points in history that shows the impact of young people, 13, 15, 18 years of age, 20, making a difference, organizing, voting, like what's going on, like similar to what's going on at Howard University, student protests, and how young people, whether it's in New York, whether it was in New York State, whether it was at Jackson State, whether it was at South Carolina State, instances where young people may, because oftentimes the advancement in countries start with young people. Why? Because they feel they have less to lose. They're not as established as you and I. They feel that where you and I may feel we have more to lose: mortgage, rent, injury, not being able to go to work. So I want to be able to present to the students how their contemporaries, those that came before them made a difference, and they can make a difference.
Yeah, and what a powerful way to engage students by showing them there have been these moments in history where young people did make a difference. This is not something that's outside of the realm of possibility for the people in the room with you. That's a great point.
Just case in point, 2-3 years ago, the young girl Greta from with the climate change, I think she's from one of the Nordic countries. Greta, I can't recall her last name.
Yep, Thunberg.
Yes, and
yeah, absolutely.
Her and the other kids have Malala from Pakistan. They have made a big difference.
Yeah, I will. You know what? I'm going to check and see through our library if there are some examples of that we already have. But this is actually a conversation I had with one of our film producers this morning. I'll let you in on a little inside info, because I had talked to Brian earlier to say, hey, I know New York City does something unique in that you guys create your own curriculum, that you are developing your in-house materials.
Yes.
And I know your sort of the Hidden Voices series, Hidden Histories. That's something that's right up the alley for Retro Report. And I was talking to one of our film producers this morning because we're looking at developing a series of how can we integrate important U.S. history concepts by finding some of these hidden histories to illuminate it, and how do we find them from diverse perspectives, some of those folks who we wouldn't, if we were picking up a history book in some other part of the country, that we wouldn't see. And actually one of the ideas I was looking at was student protest movements around the Vietnam War time, but certainly there are plenty of other examples of that as well.
I want them to know that they don't have to wait till they're 18 to matter,
right?
To be involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts or comments or questions?
When did you leave the Department of Ed?
Oh, so I was never at New York City Department of Ed. I was a high school teacher in Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, okay. I know you said you were a teacher.
Yeah. So I like, the majority of you in this room, I was for a long time a teacher. I understand what it means to be in a classroom with 30 to 35 kids at a time, and trying to meet everybody's needs, and trying to go out and find resources that engage students, that help us actually learn, meet particular standards, teach different skills. So my goal now, my job is to help teachers to, I'm